cameras flashed relentlessly outside the Waldorf Astoria, capturing the exhaustion of the world's most eligible bachelor. 350 perfect, flawless Omegas had paraded before Alpha King Oberic Covington, and he had rejected every single one. The media called him heartless, but they didn't know his desperate secret. Flashbulbs illuminated the rainy New York evening, casting long, frantic shadows against the imposing limestone facade of the Waldorf Astoria. Inside the grand ballroom, the atmosphere was suffocatingly thick with the scent of anxiety, expensive perfume, and artificial pheromones. Oberic Covington, CEO of Covington Global and the reigning Alpha King of the Eastern Seaboard, sat rigidly in a high-backed velvet chair that functioned less as seating and more as a modern-day throne. "That makes 350, sir," Liam Brooks, his impeccably dressed beta secretary, murmured, tapping the glowing screen of his tablet. "Preston Harrington, heir to the Harrington shipping fortune. He has a master's degree from Yale, speaks 4 languages, and his genetic compatibility scores are in the 98th percentile." Oberic stared blankly at the retreating back of the blonde, painfully thin Omega, who had just burst into tears upon hearing the word no. Preston had worn a custom Guernsey suit, tailored to emphasize a non-existent waist, and had doused himself in a synthetic jasmine scent blocker that made Oberic's teeth ache. "I don't care if he speaks 6 languages and can turn lead into gold, Liam," Oberic growled, rubbing his temples. A vicious headache was beginning to pulse behind his eyes. He smelled like plastic and desperation. "Next." "There is no next, Oberic," a cold voice interrupted. Richard Montgomery, the senior board member of Covington Global and a prominent alpha in his own right, stepped out from the shadows of the velvet drapery. Montgomery's face was red with suppressed rage. "You have formally rejected every single eligible Omega from the High family's 350 candidates over the last 7 days. The board is watching. Wall Street is watching. Shares of Covington Global dropped 4% this morning because Bloomberg ran a piece questioning your mental stability." Oberic stood, his towering 6'4" frame and broad shoulders instantly forcing Montgomery to take a subconscious step back. The raw, dominant aura of an Alpha King was impossible to ignore, even in a tailored Tom Ford tuxedo. "My mental stability is fine, Richard. I am simply not going to tie myself to a vapid socialite just to appease the shareholders." "This isn't about appeasing shareholders," Montgomery hissed, glancing around to ensure the private security detail was out of earshot. "It's about the charter. You turn 35 in less than a month. If you are not bonded to an Omega by then, you forfeit your seat on the Lycan Council. You forfeit majority control of the company. Davaris Langston is already lobbying the board to trigger a vote of no confidence. He knows you're stalling. Davaris Langston." Just the name made Oberic's jaw clench. Langston was a ruthless rival alpha who had been slowly buying up Covington Global stock through shell companies. If Oberic lost his seat on the council, Langston would swoop in, dismantle the philanthropic divisions of the company, and strip mine the rest for profit. But Oberic had a secret, one far more dangerous than the board's impending vote. He was losing his wolf. It was a rare, tightly guarded genetic failing known in medical circles as olfactory degeneration, but in the old texts it was called the fadding. For the past year, Oberic's ability to smell scents, the very foundation of an alpha's biological connection to the world and to a mate, had been vanishing. Flowers smelled like nothing. Food tasted like ash. And Omegas, even the most beautiful, highly sought-after ones, smelled like absolutely nothing to him. The only exception was synthetic blockers, which registered as a sharp, painful chemical burn in his sinuses. His wolf was starving, retreating deep into his subconscious. If he didn't find his true, fated mate the only scent strong enough to pierce the fading and anchor his animal, sighed his wolf would die, taking Alberic's sanity and his life with it. He couldn't just choose a random Omega from a dossier. If he didn't feel the pull, the bond wouldn't take, and the fading would accelerate. The May trial was his last, desperate gamble to find the one person on Earth who could save him. And it had been a colossal, humiliating failure. "Tell the press we are taking a recess," Alberic commanded, adjusting his cuffs with practiced indifference to mask the rising panic in his chest. "I need air. Cancel whatever is left of the evening gala." "Alberic, you can't just walk out," Montgomery began. "Watch me," Alberic snapped. He turned his back on the furious board member and strode out of the ballroom, utilizing a side exit meant for the waitstaff. He needed silence. He needed to escape the suffocating cloud of artificial perfumes and the heavy weight of his impending doom. As the heavy service door swung shut behind him, the chaotic noise of the ballroom was replaced by the low hum of industrial refrigerators and the clatter of distant dishwashing stations. He loosened his silk tie, taking a deep breath of the sterile, metallic air of the service corridor. He was going to lose everything: his company, his crown, his life. He began to walk down the long, dimly lit hallway, his expensive leather shoes clicking softly against the concrete floor. He just wanted to find the underground parking garage, get into his waiting Mercedes Maybach, and disappear into the night. But halfway down the corridor, something impossible happened. Alberic stopped dead in his tracks. His chest hitched. Deep within him, something dark and dormant stirred. The wolf, which had been silent for months, suddenly threw itself against the bars of its mental cage, a low, rumbling growl echoing in Alberic's mind. "Mate." Alberic blinked, stunned. He inhaled sharply. It was faint at first, easily masked by the smell of industrial cleaner, but as he focused, it became undeniable. It was a scent, a real, natural, overpowering scent. It didn't smell like the sterile orchids or sharp citrus the wealthy Omegas favored. It smelled like warm vanilla extract. It smelled like brown butter, toasted sugar, and a deeply comforting hint of cinnamon. It was rich, heavy, and intoxicating. It bypassed his failing olfactory glands and struck directly at his soul. His eyes dilated, the irises flashing a brilliant predatory gold in the dim light. All rational thought, all concerns about the board, Davros Langston, and the 350 rejected candidates vanished. He had to find the source. Benjamin Hayes was having the worst night of his entire 24 years of existence, and that was saying something, considering he had spent the last 3 years barely scraping by in a cramped, drafty apartment in Queens. Benji sniffled, wiping a tear from his cheek with the back of a flour-dusted hand. He was sentimentally etched into three of the Waldorf Astoria's sprawling underground kitchen. He pulled his oversized white chef's coat tighter around his body, trying to hide the soft curves of his stomach and hips that always seemed to get in the way. "Stupid, stupid, stupid," Benji whispered to himself, taking a bite out of a crushed, raspberry-filled macaron he had salvaged from the trash. It tasted like expensive failure. Benji was, or rather, had been a junior pastry chef for Caldwell Elite Catering, the incredibly demanding firm hired to provide the desserts for the Alpha King's mate trial. It was the biggest gig of Benji's career. If he did well, Chef Gordon Caldwell had promised him a promotion from making base doughs to actually designing pastries. Instead, disaster had struck. Benji was a naturally chubby Omega, a fact that in the high society world was treated as a moral failing. He didn't have the delicate, waif-like figure that Omegas were expected to maintain. He loved food. He loved baking. And consequently, he was soft, round, and plush. Chef Caldwell constantly berated him for his weight, claiming it was unprofessional for a high-end caterer to look like he ate his own stock. But the real problem was his scent blockers, Standard over-the-counter suppressants gave Benji terrible rashes, so he had to buy the expensive organic brand. But rent had been raised last month, and Benji had been forced to dilute his blockers with water to make them last. Tonight, under the intense heat of the kitchen and the sheer stress of plating 400 miniature swans made of spun sugar, his diluted blockers had completely failed. His natural center-thick sweet aroma of vanilla and baked goods had bloomed uncontrollably. Chef Caldwell had lost his mind. He had screamed at Benji in front of the entire kitchen staff, accusing him of trying to draw the attention of the alpha guests upstairs. In his panic and humiliation, Benji had stumbled backward, knocking over a towering 6-tier display of imported chocolate truffles. Thousands of dollars of exquisite desserts ruined in a second. Caldwell had fired him on the spot, screaming at him to pack his knives and get out. So here Benji sat in the dim pantry, hiding among 60-pound bags of flour and industrial vats of olive oil, trying to stop crying before he had to face the subway ride home. He was unemployed, broke, and his unsuppressed omega scent was swirling around him, thick with distress and sadness. "I'll just have to apply at that diner in Brooklyn," Benji mumbled to himself, popping another broken piece of macaron into his mouth. "Maybe they won't mind an omega who looks like a marshmallow." Suddenly, the heavy metal door of the pantry was shoved open with enough force to dent the wall behind it. Benji gasped, dropping the remains of the pastry, and scrambled backward on his plastic crate. He expected to see Chef Caldwell coming to yell at him some more, or perhaps hotel security coming to physically throw him out into the rain. Instead, a giant stepped into the room. Benji's breath caught in his throat. The man standing in the doorway was the most terrifyingly handsome alpha Benji had ever seen in his life. He was incredibly tall, dressed in a black tuxedo that screamed generational wealth, with broad shoulders that seemed to fill the entire doorframe. His dark hair was slightly messy, as if he had been running his hands through it, and his sharp, aristocratic jawline was clenched tight. But it was his eyes that paralyzed Benji. They were glowing a brilliant, mesmerizing gold. The alpha stood frozen, chest heaving as he stared down at Benji huddled in the corner. The air in the small pantry instantly thickened, heavy with the dominating, woodsy scent of a prime alpha. It smelled like cedar, thunderstorms, and dark, bitter espresso. It made Benji's head spin and his knees weak. His omega instincts flared to life, screaming at him to submit, to bare his neck, to make himself small. I'm sorry," Benji stammered, frantically trying to wipe the powdered sugar off his round cheeks. "I know I'm not supposed to be in here. I was just getting my things. Chef Caldwell fired me. I'm leaving right now, I swear." The alpha didn't say a word. He took a slow, deliberate step into the pantry, letting the heavy door click shut behind him. The sound echoed in the quiet space, trapping them together in the dim light. "Please don't call security," Benji pleaded, his voice trembling as he pressed his back against a shelf of canned tomatoes. He wrapped his arms defensively around his soft middle. "I'll pay for the truffles. I mean, I can't pay for them right now, but I can set up a payment plan. Just let me get my bag." Alberic felt like he was moving underwater. The world outside this small, flour-dusted room had ceased to exist. His wolf was practically clawing at the inside of his chest, howling in triumph. "Mine, mate. Safe." He looked at the boy trembling before him. This wasn't one of the polished, starving heirs upstairs. This boy had messy brown hair, a smudge of flour on his nose, and cheeks that were flush with panic. He was distinctly and unapologetically chubby, wearing an ill-fitting chef's coat that strained slightly around his hips, and he was the most beautiful creature Alberic had ever seen. The overpowering scent of warm vanilla and distress was coming off the boy in waves. Alberic's senses, dead for nearly a year, were suddenly hyper-aware. He could hear the rapid hummingbird flutter of the boy's heartbeat. He could see the faint pulse jumping in the soft flesh of his neck. "You're distressed," Alberic murmured, his voice coming out as a deep, gravelly rumble that vibrated right through Benji's chest. Benji blinked, confused by the shift in tone. The Alpha didn't sound angry about the trespassing. He sounded concerned. Well, yes," Benji stammered. "I just lost my job, and I ruined the catering display, and my rent is due." Alberic took another step closer, entirely ignoring the boy's words, zeroing in on the tears pooling in those wide, hazel eyes. The Alpha King, a man who regularly intimidated foreign dignitaries and ruthless Wall Street billionaires, felt a sudden violent urge to track down whoever had made this Omega cry and tear them limb from limb. "What is your name?" Alberic asked, stopping just a few feet away, restraining himself from reaching out and pulling the soft, trembling boy into his arms. "Be Benjamin," he whispered. "Benjamin Hayes." "Everyone calls me Benji." "Benji," Alberic repeated, tasting the name on his tongue. It fit him perfectly, soft, sweet, unassuming. "Why are you wearing blockers, Benji?" Benji flushed a deep, embarrassed red. "Because I'm an Omega in a professional kitchen. Nobody wants their food to smell like me, and Chef Caldwell says my natural scent is too heavy, too cheap." A low, terrifying growl ripped from Alberic's throat before he could stop it. The shelves rattled. Benji whimpered, shrinking down further, terrified he had said the wrong thing. Instantly, Alberic dropped to one knee, bringing himself down to Benji's eye level, softening his posture to appear less threatening. "Forgive me," Alberic said quickly, his glowing eyes locked on Benji's terrified face. "The growl was not directed at you, little one. It was directed at the absolute fool who dared to tell you to hide this." "Ugh! Ah!" Alberic leaned in slightly, closing his eyes as he inhaled deeply, shamelessly breathing in the thick, sweet scent rolling off the Omega. The chronic headache that had plagued Alberic for months instantly evaporated. The fog in his mind cleared. The fading vanished, replaced by an overwhelming surge of strength and clarity. "Your scent is perfect," Alberic breathed, opening his eyes. They were slowly shifting back from gold to their natural, piercing ice blue. "It is the only real thing in this entire building." Benji stared at the man kneeling in front of him, utterly bewildered. The Alpha was wearing a Patek Philippe watch that likely cost more than Benji would make in a decade. He was looking at Benji not with disgust or dismissal, but with a raw, hungry reverence. Who are you?" Benji asked softly, his fear slowly being replaced by a strange, magnetic curiosity. Alberic offered a small, unexpectedly gentle smile. "My name is Alberic Covington, and it seems, Benji Hayes, that I have spent the entire evening rejecting 350 people, only to find the one I was actually looking for hiding in a pantry." Davarius Langston tapped his platinum Rolex against the mahogany surface of the Waldorf Astoria's lobby bar, a smug, venomous smile playing on his lips. As the CEO of Langston Acquisitions and the second most powerful Alpha on the Eastern Seaboard, he had orchestrated tonight's failure perfectly. He had leaked the rumors of Alberic Covington's fading to the Wall Street Journal, bribed 3 members of the Lycan Council, and ensured that the 350 Omegas presented tonight were genetically incompatible with the Alpha King. Tonight Alberic's reign was supposed to end. "Mr. Langston," Richard Montgomery hissed, scuttling over from the ballroom entrance, his face slick with anxious sweat. "He's gone. Alberic walked out of the ballroom 20 minutes ago, and security can't locate him. The Bloomberg reporters are getting restless. If we call a vote of no confidence right now, we have the majority." "Patience, Richard," Davarius purred, taking a slow sip of his Macallan 50-year-old scotch. "Let the press stew. I want them to photograph his empty throne. Let the world see that Covington Global is leaderless. Suddenly, a collective gasp ripped through the grand lobby. Camera shutters erupted in a blinding, deafening staccato. Tavares's smile vanished. He stood up, pushing past a group of Morgan Stanley executives, his eyes narrowing at the source of the commotion. Alberic Covington was striding back into the main hall, flanked by his private security detail. He did not look like a man whose empire was collapsing. The lethargy and exhaustion that had plagued him for months were completely gone. He walked with the lethal, predatory grace of a fully realized alpha king, his ice-blue eyes blazing with territorial authority. But it was the person entirely engulfed by Alberic's protective grip that sent shockwaves through the elite crowd. Alberic was tightly holding the hand of a short, decidedly chubby boy, wearing a stained, oversized chef's coat and flour-dusted clogs. The boy was visibly trembling, his cheeks flushed crimson, trying desperately to hide behind Alberic's massive frame. Compared to the emaciated, diamond-draped socialites who had paraded the stage earlier, this boy looked like he had just tumbled out of a commercial bakery. "What, in the name of the goddess, is this?" Montgomery sputtered, nearly dropping his tablet. Alberic marched straight toward the elevated dais in the center of the room, completely ignoring the frantic reporters from Forbes and the New York Times. He pulled the trembling boy up the steps with him, wrapping a heavy possessive arm around his thick waist, anchoring him to his side. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," Alberic's voice boomed, rich and laced with the undeniable resonance of an alpha command. The entire room fell dead silent, the sheer force of his tone forcing several weaker alphas to involuntarily avert their eyes. "I present to you Benjamin Hayes, my fated mate." Pandemonium broke out. Reporters shouted over one another. Flashes blinded the room, and the rejected Omegas in the audience gasped in pure, unfiltered outrage. "This is a farce," Tavares Langston roared, stepping out of the crowd and storming toward the dais. "Look at him. You expect us to believe that the fated mate of the Alpha King is a kitchen servant?" Tavares sneered, his gaze sweeping over Benji's soft plush figure with blatant disgust. "He doesn't even possess the physiological markers of a high-tier Omega. He's carrying 20 pounds of excess weight and smells like a cheap donut shop." Benji flinched violently, tears welling in his eyes. He tried to pull his hand away, a lifetime of insecurity crashing down on him. "Alberic, please," Benji whispered, his voice cracking. "He's right. I don't belong here. Look at them, and look at me." Alberic's grip only tightened. He turned to Benji, bringing a large, warm hand up to cup the boy's flour-smudged cheek. "You listen to me, Benji," Alberic said softly, ignoring the hundreds of people staring at them. "You are exactly as you are meant to be. My wolf chose you. My heart chose you. Do not let these hollow corporate parasites make you feel small." Alberic turned back to Langston, his fangs extending slightly, a terrifying low growl vibrating in his chest. "Tread very carefully, Langston. You are speaking about the future king consort of Covington Global." "He is a fraud," Tavares shouted, gesturing to the back of the room. "And I can prove it. Bring him in." The crowd parted, and Chef Gordon Caldwell, the head caterer who had fired Benji 30 minutes prior, was marched forward by Langston's security men. Caldwell looked terrified but resolute. "Tell them, Chef," Tavares commanded. "Tell the board what this boy really is." Caldwell swallowed hard, avoiding Benji's shocked gaze. He's a corporate spy, sir. He stole highly concentrated experimental pheromones from a biotech lab. He infused them into his scent blockers to bypass the king's olfactory degeneration. I caught him in the pantry applying them, trying to stage a fated encounter. The boardroom erupted into furious shouts. Montgomery aggressively slammed his fist on a table. Treason, corporate espionage. The bond is invalid, Oberick. The charter demands an immediate vote of no confidence. Benji felt his knees give out. That's a lie. He sobbed, clutching Oberick's tuxedo jacket. I didn't. I was just making swans. I watered down my blockers because I can't afford rent, I swear. Oberick didn't blink. He didn't yell. He simply looked at Davaris Langston with a calmness that was infinitely more terrifying than anger. You always were a sloppy chess player, Davaris, Oberick said coldly. He raised a hand, snapping his fingers once. Liam Brooks, Oberick's beta secretary, immediately stepped out from the wings, accompanied by a stern, silver-haired man carrying a metallic medical case. Members of the board, Oberick announced. May I introduce Dr. Arthur Penhaligon, Chief Geneticist of the Lycan Medical Council from Johns Hopkins University. Since Langston has made an accusation of pheromone tampering, Lycan law dictates an immediate public blood scent verification. Davaris's smug expression faltered. Now see here, Covington. You can't just, I can, and I did, Oberick interrupted. He looked down at Benji. Do you trust me, sweetheart? Benji looked up into those icy blue eyes. Despite the chaos, despite the terrifying crowd and the cruel accusations, Oberick sent cedar and thunderstorms wrapped around him like a protective blanket. Benji nodded slowly, yes. Dr. Penhaligon stepped forward, opening his metallic case to reveal a portable, highly sophisticated centrifuge and chemical analyzer. Mr. Hayes, I just need a drop of blood and the swab from your scent gland, the doctor said gently. Benji complied, offering his wrist and tilting his neck. The room held its collective breath as the doctor inserted the samples into the machine. It hummed quietly, a digital screen processing the genetic and hormonal data in real time, projecting the results onto the massive screens usually reserved for Covington Global's quarterly earnings reports. Davaris Langston began to sweat. He subtly took a step backward toward the exit, but Oberick's security detail seamlessly shifted, blocking his path. The analysis is complete, Dr. Penhaligon announced, his voice echoing through the microphone. He adjusted his glasses, looking at the screen with sheer professional awe. Not only are Mr. Hayes's pheromones 100% natural, with absolutely zero traces of synthetic enhancers, but his genetic sequence is a statistical miracle. The doctor turned to face the stunned crowd. Mr. Off, Hayes possesses an exceptionally rare ancient omega strain. His biological markers, including the very body fat that Mr. Langston so callously mocked, our evolutionary adaptations designed to anchor and heal an alpha suffering from olfactory degeneration. His scent profile is a flawless, perfect lock to Alpha King Covington's fading receptors. This isn't just a fated mate bond, this is a biological imperative. They are a 1 in a billion match. A heavy, absolute silence fell over the Waldorf Astoria ballroom. The science was undeniable. Furthermore, Dr. Penhaligon added, looking sternly at Chef Caldwell, it takes 3 seconds of chemical analysis to prove someone is lying. Security, you may want to detain the chef for perjury. Before Caldwell could even scream, Covington's security hauled him away. Oberick turned his gaze to Davaris Langston. My investigators have been busy too, Davaris. They tracked the shell companies you used to bribe the board members and sabotage the Omega selection pool. Sabotaging a royal mate trial is a federal offense under the Lycan Charter. Davaris turned pale, his arrogant facade shattering into panic. Oberick, let's be reasonable. We can negotiate a merger. There will be no merger, Oberick growled, his voice vibrating with absolute authority. There will only be your total surrender. Liam, hand the evidence over to the federal authorities. As federal agents, who had been waiting quietly in the lobby, stepped into the ballroom to place a screaming Davaris Langston in handcuffs, Oberick turned his back on the ensuing chaos. He didn't care about the cameras, the board, or the collapsing empire of his rival. He only cared about the boy looking up at him with wide, tear-filled hazel eyes. Alberic wrapped his arms fully around Benji, pulling the soft, chubby Omega flush against his chest. Benji melted into the embrace, burying his face in Alberic's neck, taking a deep, shuddering breath of the cedar and espresso scent that finally felt like home. "You're safe now, my sweet baker," Alberic murmured into Benji's messy brown hair, kissing his temple. "You will never have to water down your blockers, hide in a pantry, or worry about your rent ever again. You are mine, even if I eat too many macarons." Benji mumbled into Alberic's tuxedo collar, a tiny, tentative smile finally breaking through his tears. Alberic chuckled, a deep, rich sound that made Benji's toes curl. "I will buy you every bakery in Paris if you want them, Benji. I want you exactly as you are." Right there on the stage in front of the entire financial and social elite of New York City, the Alpha King dipped his head and claimed his mate. The kiss was gentle at first, a tender promise of protection, before deepening into a scorching, passionate vow that sent a wave of pure, comforting vanilla and cedar crashing over the entire room. 6 months later, Covington Global's stock was at an all-time high, but Alberic Covington rarely spent his days in the boardroom anymore. Instead, he could be found in the sunlit, state-of-the-art test kitchen he had built on the top floor of his penthouse. He sat at the counter, completely mesmerized, as his beautiful, glowing husband, dressed in a custom-tailored silk apron, excitedly pulled a tray of perfectly browned, cinnamon-dusted pastries from the oven. Alberic breathed in the rich, sweet scent of baked goods and his fiercely loved Omega, knowing that the fading was a distant memory. The Alpha King hadn't needed a perfectly polished socialite to save his crown. He just needed a chubby baker from Queens to save his soul. If you loved the intense drama, the satisfying downfall of Doverus Langston, and the sweet romance between Alberic and Benji, make sure to hit that like button. Share this story with your friends who love a good Omegaverse twist, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more thrilling, heartwarming stories every week. Drop a comment below on what your favorite moment was.